Well, I think what we were getting out of this user testing is they didn't understand averaging, so it was hard to then...
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That only 2 participants could understood after reading the then current letter that they were at risk of their entitlements being calculated on assumption that they earned their income in equal amounts for each fortnight under consideration. Didn't that tell you that there was a fundamental problem with the program?
Told me there's a fundamental problem with the Australian education system where people can't understand averaging. It's pretty poor that people can't understand adding numbers up and dividing by the weeks actually is an average. That's pretty appalling. But that's where we're at as a society, so there you go. I've still got to communicate with those people. I've still got to explain. This was a very difficult process because we wanted to explain it to people, but essentially it was very difficult to do. We sort of had to explain averaging first and then the application of averaging. So I had to do both, not just the application of averaging. And that's pretty difficult for us to do.
Welcome to the Westminster tradition, where we are unpacking lessons for the public service, starting with the Robodebt Royal Commission. My name is Caroline Crozabalo, and joining me today on Kaurna land is my fellow South Australian public servant, Alison Lloyd-Wright.
Hi, Caroline.
And recovering public servant, Danielle Elston.
Hello, Caroline.
Well, I'm feeling deeply uncomfortable, and I'm sure our listeners are too, because I am not the usual introducer of this show. Right. So, why am I introducing this, you might say? Well, I guess one of the things that had a big profile in the Robodebt Royal Commission is behavioural insights, a thing about which I know actually nothing and about which both Danielle and Alison are deeply passionate. And so today I'm going to be turning it over to them for the content and asking the interesting big questions that Alison is good at. So don't judge me, judge them. All right, starting...
But not too harsh.
But not too harshly, that's right, because we're all just learning. Is that a thing we do in behavioural insights? I don't know. Tell me, what is a behavioural insight, Alison?
So, I guess, first of all, some context for this episode, right? So when we started talking about this podcast, Danielle and I discussed the possibility of an episode on behavioural insights because at the time, and question whether it's still the case, we had wildly different opposing views.
And I suspect that how this goes, I agree, and I suspect how this goes, as is always the case, it's that we did the I believe X, and then the unpacking of that is we both shuffle towards the middle slightly. And so, like, for the spoiler component of it, I have used behavioural insights, I think, reasonably successfully and usefully, but recognise the many, many flaws, and I think there's something in that. And you have, in all of your interactions with behavioural insights, thought it was all a reasonably large load of rubbish.
Correct.
So all I'm hearing
that's
here
our starting position.
is Danielle giving up on the debate and giving up on the debate from the beginning.
No.
Excellent expectation management, Danielle. I note that neither of you actually answered my question.
No, I'm about to. We just took a journey. So behavioural insights sort of comes out of this book that was published called Nudge, and I can strongly recommend the 2-part episode of If Books Could Kill podcast on the book Nudge, which really suggested that instead of policy or programmatic interventions to get people to behave the way you wanted them to behave, you could just take small nudges. Attempts to, I'm going to describe it as almost reduce friction in the process and make it more likely that people take the choice that you want them to take. Because if you think about a lot of what we do in government is a lot of trying to get people to behave a certain way, right?
Yeah.
We want people to smoke less. We want them to drive more safely. We want them to get vaccinations.
Stop weighing on Parliament House. Lots of things.
And so the idea behind this is that you could just make it easier for people to make the right choice. So far...
Doesn't sound too bad in principle. It's possible that in principle it's good, Alison, and in execution has been used like terribly poorly by a number of people.
Can I ask for an example of one sort of nudge that one might do? Like how might one, for example, nudge us to...
So one of the ones that I agree is effective is around texting people to remind them of their government appointment or obligation. So I now receive a nice little text from my local hospital when I have to turn up for a regularly scheduled appointment about a day before, because otherwise the piece of paper correspondence that they send me 6
which
months
they are
in
still
advance,
actually sending quite often.
Yeah, we still get those. Yep.
Yeah, like it recognises that a lot of people don't engage with their paper mail, that actually they were much more effective at getting people to show up. I think it was court appearances that they modelled this one on when they sent them a text saying, remember, you and
tomorrow.
me, Magistrates Court, 10 a.m.
Yeah, totally. And the flip of that is, so that is better for you because you turn up for the test, Alison, which presumably then maintains your health in a fashion that is great for you. It also means you can use resources better. So particularly, I think public health systems and particularly outpatients in public hospitals have a very, very high no-show rate. So they overbook. So there was a attempt to, before they were doing text messages, to do some phone calls on top of the letter that you get 3 months earlier in the lung section of a public hospital about 10 years ago. And so what they were doing was overbooking by 30% because they knew that about 40% didn't turn up.
Oh, my God.
Every now and then everybody would turn up.
Yeah. Whoops.
Right? And the wait would then be like 3 hours instead of your appointment time. And so things like that are not just about, I think there's 2 parts to behavioural insights. What do we want the person to do, but what does government need? Right. So in that situation, it's about resource allocation.
But it doesn't seem particularly insightful to say, here's a text message to remind you of your appointment. Like, where's all this psychological insight stuff coming in? Well,
and this is where I guess I start from a position that some of this is just bunk. But I do think that there are ways that you can leverage how people tend to behave, right? So one of them is a form where you're filling out for your driver's licence. Are you... And you tick no.
Yeah.
8 questions in a row. Most people would tick no.
Yeah.
And then the last one is, do you want to be an organ donor?
Oh, yeah, no,
right,
we should
so
flip
your
that.
pattern, right?
We should definitely flip that one.
So I think there are some ways where, like, all the thing you fill out when you get on the plane, do you have dangerous goods?
Yeah.
Right, where you can just kind of take advantage of
I find
people's...
that one needs to be flipped, by the way.
I agree.
Some
There's one
airlines
wrong.
have,
Oh,
and
that's
there's a
even more-
green
that's
button
even more-
and a red button, which I noticed at the airport the other day, and I was like,
Because when I go to Chile, I have to stop every time I stop thinking, hang on, do I? What? Hang on. Is it in the double negative? Am
I what? Do I not have dangerous? Yeah. So don't get me wrong, I think there is a place for taking advantage of the kind of mental shortcuts that people make.
Yeah.
To reduce friction in the service we're trying to deliver them, or the choice we would like them to make.
Yeah.
I do think it gets problematic in a couple of critical ways, and one of those ways was in Robodebt.
Okay.
So how is behavioural insights used in Robodebt? You might remember that one of the motivations was they wanted Centrelink recipients who had a debt to proactively contact the department.
Yeah.
Right? So they felt that these people weren't engaging with the department.
Yep.
And one of the ways they would nudge them towards engagement.
You just have to accept you're going to use the word nudge 100 times and keep going.
Was to send them a really threatening letter saying you owe us 20 grand and get in contact. But with very few easy options about how you did get in contact.
And so there's a second layer that they wanted to achieve through behavioural insights there, which is they wanted everyone to start using the online portal.
So it was to push everyone
So they
into
wanted
the
everybody
online
to make sure they were using the online portal and using. And I have had a couple of deep frustrations recently with government and a big company where, no, I don't want to talk to you and I really don't want to talk on the phone and whatever else. However, I've already done all of those things. I'm in the portal. I have a thing and my problem doesn't fit all your boxes, which I think with Robodebt again comes up because they were averaging. There was a fundamental problem in the interaction where just updating them wasn't going to help.
Yeah, and just pushing them onto the portal didn't actually allow them to say, hold up, I'm pretty sure I don't owe that much money.
It didn't solve, it didn't, it gave the government what they wanted, which was it's your job we want to nudge you to contact us instead of us contacting you. yay.
Yeah.
But then it completely stopped and fell over at that point because it was like there was nothing you could do after you'd said, don't think that's right.
Yeah.
Well, but even then, like, again, it's putting the onus back on the Centrelink recipient to be the one that makes contact, right?
Yeah.
Vulnerable people with complex lives who might have a whole lot of other things going on get a letter that says you owe a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it just becomes another thing that they have to do now, is proactively get in contact with Centrelink.
Yeah. And so whilst I think that you and I have very strong and well-formed views on this, we could perhaps go to what Commissioner Holmes in the report noted about how this all came to pass. It's a little bit long, so bear with me for a second, but also it's the last line. The system was set up with the intention of forcing recipients to respond online to the PAYG data and to minimise contact with DHS officers in the interests of the economy. This was vital to the anticipated savings. Brackets. Indeed, having had the benefit of, air quotes, behavioural insights, DHS employees setting up the system made a conscious decision not to include a telephone number for the Customer Compliance Division in the letters sent to recipients, so as to force them to respond online, while compliance officers were told to direct recipients online. No outside parties with an interest in the welfare were consulted in order to understand how the scheme might actually affect people.
Yep.
There appears to have been an obliviousness to, or at worst a callous disregard of, the fact that many welfare recipients neither had the means nor ability to negotiate the online system. The effect on a largely disadvantaged, vulnerable population of suddenly making demands on them for payment of debts, often in the thousands of dollars, seems to have not have been the subject of any behavioural insight at all.
She is so good.
Go Kanish.
So I guess...
So where I go to this... So I really am interested in her issue of vulnerability there because where I think behavioural insights is helpful if you frame it properly and do it yourself as opposed to, I suppose, the best-selling airport book that kind of found its way into every kind of office around the world 15 years ago, is I would like us to have better insight into the behaviours of people we do not understand very well because we have become so disconnected from the populace. And the way we write and speak and behave is frequently frequently very designed for a white middle and upper middle class. It's designed for ourselves.
Yeah.
So if you were to receive a letter saying pursuant to Section 715 of the, Cupboard Door Act, you need
I'd be looking up the Cupboard Door Act.
Seriously, right?
Yep.
State government
So
overreach.
if someone wrote you that letter,
Yeah, I would engage with it.
You would engage with it. For most people, once you get the word pursuant, you're out.
Well, and so here's
Most people, I would say, pursuant, you're out.
Yeah.
And so,
I don't disagree with you, but I want to add the further complexity, which is that I think in government we have been too led by an economic discipline that assumes that all people are rational economic actors in every behavioural choice that they make. And that's rarely so. And there is, in fact, like a whole other discipline that's dedicated to the idea that we are not rational economic actors and that we are persuadable to do things that are arguably not in our best interest. And that's marketing.
Yeah.
Right?
And particularly
I don't
social
need
marketing.
to buy the Kit Kat when I go to pay for the petrol, but I do. And I think and that is really driven by actually understanding the things that do motivate people, not the things that we think should motivate people to behave in a certain way.
Yeah. So again, I you're right. I was like a little bit lacking in courage at the beginning around coming in the middle, but and again, I'm terribly sorry to our lawyer friends in the sense that they're not about to do well in my next kind of. But I worked on a transition of how we do fines.
Yep.
Traffic fines, mainly traffic fines, not exclusively, but mainly traffic fines. And in a kind of unshocking event, a long time ago, we were sending them out in Times New Roman, and they started with, "Dear Danielle, pursuant to section such and such." They were 842 words.
Ooh.
They went over 2
They
pages.
didn't say you spared his $150.
Yes.
Eventually.
It was in there. It was in there. And so the compliance of paying them was quite low. The compliance of engaging was quite low. There was for all of the words, there was nothing that told you, if you're frightened and overwhelmed, here's how we can help you. Like, there was nothing in there. The escalation process was, if you don't just pay it by X date, you'll hear from us. It didn't even tell you what all the steps were going to be. In the process of transitioning, it was very challenging to get a lawyer to agree we could write that in a way anyone else could understand. Was it still valid?
Yeah.
In fact, the first iteration I could get up had a front and a back, like a Danielle version and a lawyer version.
Oh, I love this so much.
I'm not kidding.
Was yours the front?
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Please.
And we slowly iterated our way to safety, but it was very hard, and anyone with slightly less of an eye twitch about it would have walked away from that process. But I was like, we cannot reform this and continue to speak like this. Let's walk out. I would like to go and stand outside the train station and hand these letters to 50 people, and I can guarantee you guys, no, like, everyone understands this. I'm like, no, they don't.
No, they really don't.
And so can I say that I think the expertise you were bringing there was actually your comms and marketing expertise, not a behavioural economist's expertise. But what I would say is good about nudge, behavioural insights and behavioural economics is exactly what you're saying. Iterate until it's right and A/B test.
Yeah.
Right. So put two out in the world, see which one
part of it.
works, follow the one that works, test it against another one, keep going.
Yeah.
That has value. Where I think we run into trouble with behavioural insights is it's one thing if the objective here was to push people onto the online portal, but actually the objective was to recover the debt.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that there has been a tendency to use behavioural insights in lieu of or in place of actually more effective policy and program interventions.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the things where government has actually really effectively changed a lot of people's behaviour, so the one that really sticks out to me is our efforts over decades, mostly at a federal government level, but state government to some extent, to get fewer people to smoke and to smoke less.
Yeah.
So
that has been effective, not because it was just behavioural insights, but, sure, make the packets ugly and make them have a hideous rotten lung on them.
No
but also
advertising.
reduce the places where people can smoke, make it really expensive to buy a pack of cigarettes. Like, it's a constellation of interventions that will yield that population-level behavioural change, and I think it's just kind of cheap and a bit cute to pretend
I thought you were going to go
that
lazy.
Behavioural insights
I
will
thought you
do
were going
that
to go
for
lazy.
you.
Yeah.
And I think there's something, I guess what I'm hearing is there's also something about kind of the morality or the kind of ethics of it, because if we're talking about default choices, which seems like a lot of this is like default choices, like it's fine to shape people's default choices in a certain way. Like, you know, I just said we should make it easy to say, yes, I'm an organ donor. Like you just kind of do it that way. But government is not just trying to tell you something or whatever. Like, it's an exercise of power.
Yes.
And so you need to make sure that default choice is ethical. So the default choice in Robodebt, we're not going to give you a phone number, you have to go online. And if you don't go online, which lots of people don't, then you just get the debt, right? And that was fine. That achieved government's purpose. None of that was ethical. None of that was actually truthful.
None of it recognises, like, the gross and violent power disparity between the government and individuals engaging with the government.
Yeah.
And vulnerability.
Yeah.
Like, we should design every program and policy and initiative around everybody, and so that includes making sure that it meets all kind of vulnerability targets. The one place where you just cannot possibly argue for it at all that you must do that is it's got to be welfare.
Yeah.
Like, we should do it for everything.
Yeah.
And welfare has to be like the centre of where we make sure that we are being extra careful about these things. So unless the internet lies, which of course we know it does, the Behavioural Economics Australia team still exists.
Yeah.
And
I think you said that the wrong way around. I don't think it's Behavioural Economics Australia team.
No,
I believe it was.
Sorry, Behavioural Economics Team Australia.
Because it's beta. It's a powerful
but
beta
also,
testing.
it's got Team Australia at the end, which is maybe I just couldn't do it. But their mission is to improve the lives of Australians by generating and applying evidence from the behavioural and social sciences. And this is where it gets interesting, Alison, where I think we are potentially moving from a airport book to building our own version of behavioural and social sciences. So you notice that the social science is back in.
Yes.
To find solutions to complex policy problems, and they're there to conduct research to better understand how people interact with programs and policy issues, design and rigorously test policy solutions informed by behavioural science, translate our research and expertise into practical advice on how to improve policies and programs, and uplift APS capability and support application of it in the public service. If we can grapple with the idea that it's not the airport book but it's something else, can we keep going in this direction, do you think?
So...
Because that list is not terrible, right? Like, you don't hear that and think that's a bad thing for government to be doing.
I think reducing friction in default choices is an excellent outcome, right? And reducing friction in engaging with government is an excellent outcome.
Yeah.
I am concerned about the data and examples that we use in Nudge, but also to kind of establish behavioural economics teams worldwide. Yeah. I'm concerned about the, replicability crisis and causality of some of the things that have been attributed as being behavioural insights that ought to more properly be thought of as policy interventions or programs.
Yeah.
So I think that there is room to better understand our constituents and customers and
that's what I'm worried gets lost if we chuck this out.
What actually motivates them. Yeah. I agree with you on that.
Like, that's what I'm worried about, is that it was the first time I ever felt government was paying attention to the fact that we were writing letters to ourselves and to an audience that was about us, and tried to do something about it. I think the execution in lots and lots of places was really terrible, but I'm really worried about your idea of, and I mean, sometimes we're just talking about the name of something.
And I was going to say, isn't it now just user-centred design? Like, I feel like a lot of your concerns, Alison, have been kind of overcome by the user-centred design process, because it's really emphasises the user and, like, is it a good experience? Crazy for the user. But often user-centred design gives you lots of the same, like, you prototype, let's work out what. I just... On that, and I think there is something about the naming and kind of what your angle is, whether you're thinking about it from the user or from what I need as government. There's in the Dr. Darren O'Donovan interview, which I did, we've got a brilliant grab from Jason McNamara, who was the first Assistant Secretary responsible for putting in some of the BI into Robodebt. And he's talking through some of the customer insights that they used, where they tried to test the letters, and he kind of gets to the point where he says, look, we tested it, and out of the 40 people we tested various versions with, 3 people understood what it meant. And Commissioner Holmes is like, well, wasn't that in fact, I think it was Angus Scott says, the point of the letter was to put people on notice. So, like, if they're not on notice, then it hasn't happened. Like, doesn't that tell you there's something fundamentally wrong? And he says, well, I mean, of course, like, it tells us there's something fundamentally wrong with the education system, which I found to be a reasonably interesting observation.
Oh, a bit offensive, sorry.
Yeah. You're not in the public service, feel free to say that one. But he sort of says, well, in the end, even though it didn't use a test that well, I thought it was better to put it out there and have at least 30 people show it to other people who might be able to explain it to them. So it was a better outcome than nothing. I can't overcome the fact that people don't understand the concept of averaging. And so in that context, right, I think about what is the purpose of behavioural insights? Who is it for? And so it wasn't for the customer.
No, it was for the government.
And this really showed it wasn't for the customer.
No, and that's my issue, I think.
Yeah,
and mine is, I don't want to lose the customer.
Yeah.
So if we go, this hasn't worked very well for us as a concept, because there are some things in that, like testing letters, doing iterative design, checking language, that I don't want to lose. Absolutely. And if we go, the whole thing was a disaster, let's throw it out, I'm worried about losing the customer parts of it. But this wasn't being used for the customer. No. It was being used for the government, and it's a little bit of a cloak.
Yeah.
A little bit of a, we've done our almost like not due diligence.
Well, that's
too strong.
what Jason McNamara is saying,
due diligence
right?
is quite a strong term though, but like it's like we've done our research, I suppose, is a better thing, and it's going to be fine. And so, like, that's dangerous, and we don't want that. So it's a real balance, I think, and I don't want to lose something that became a part of behavioural insights. I don't want to lose that, but I don't want to have to keep the bit where it's driven by what government needs.
So what I love is that in this episode, you two have come together in the middle, as Danielle predicted wisely at the beginning.
And that was not planned at all. I just knew that's how that would land.
That's right. Do I get to say it?
You do.
Till next time. Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. Those of us in the employ of the state government speak in a strictly personal capacity, consistent with the Public Sector Code of Ethics that permits public servants to promote an outcome in relation to an issue of public interest, in this case, the betterment of the public service. Nothing we say should be taken as representing the views of the government or our employers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. If you want rigorous reporting on Robodebt, we recommend the work of Rick Morton at the Saturday Paper, Chris Nouse and Luc Henrique Gomez at The Guardian, Ben Eltham at Crikey, and of course, the Robodebt Royal Commission itself. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.